The text message came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing rental applications for my newest property acquisition. Mom's message was characteristically blunt. Emergency sale. Had to sell your room to strangers for cash. Come pack your memories this weekend. I stared at the message for a moment, trying to process what she meant. My childhood room had been converted into a rental space 3 years ago when my parents started struggling financially. They'd put up a wall to create a separate entrance, installed a kitchenette, and began renting it out for $800 a month to help cover their mortgage payments. I texted back, "What do you mean sold my room? Like sold the whole house?" "No," came her immediate reply. "Just your section. We found someone willing to buy just that part. Separate deed and everything. Needed the money fast." This was news to me. I didn't even know it was possible to sell part of a house as a separate property, but apparently my parents had found a way. "We sold your room to strangers for cash," she texted again as if I hadn't understood the first time. "Pack your memories." I replied, "That's fine, I understand." It was fine actually. I hadn't lived in that room for over a decade and most of my important childhood items were already stored in my apartment. If my parents needed money and found a creative way to get it, I wasn't going to make their situation more difficult. She asked, "You're not mad?" I smiled because the strangers were actually my property management company. Specifically, they were strangers, named Riverside Property Holdings LLC, which was one of the subsidiary companies I'd created to manage smaller residential investments. The cash sale they'd made was actually my way of quietly helping my parents without them knowing it was me. I'd been watching their financial struggles for months. Dad had been laid off from his job at the manufacturing plant 8 months ago, and at 62 he was finding it difficult to find new employment. Mom's part-time job at the library wasn't enough to cover their expenses, and I'd noticed them getting increasingly stressed about money. When Mom mentioned they were considering selling part of the house, I'd immediately seen an opportunity to help them while also making a sound investment. I'd had my attorney research the legal requirements for subdividing residential property and discovered it was indeed possible under certain circumstances. 2 weeks ago, I'd had Riverside Property Holdings make an offer on the converted portion of my parents' house. The offer was generous, $65,000 for what was essentially a small studio apartment, but not so generous as to seem suspicious. My parents had accepted immediately. The closing had happened yesterday, which explained the timing of Mom's text. They now had $65,000 in cash, and their mortgage payment would be much more manageable without that financial pressure. The irony was that I'd essentially just bought my own childhood room back from my parents, who had no idea their daughter was the stranger who'd solved their financial crisis. My phone rang as I was thinking about this. Mom's name appeared on the screen. Lily. Her voice was brighter than I'd heard it in months. "Did you get my message about the room?" "I did," I said. "Congratulations on the sale. That must be a relief." "Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea. We were so worried about the mortgage payments, and then this buyer just appeared out of nowhere with a cash offer. It's like a miracle." I smiled at her description of my property management company as a miracle. "Tell me about the buyer," I said, curious to hear her perspective on the transaction. "Well, it's some kind of investment company. Very professional, very efficient. They had lawyers and inspectors and all sorts of official people. The paperwork was incredibly thorough. That would be because I'd insisted on doing everything properly, with full legal documentation and professional property assessments. If I was going to own part of my childhood home, I wanted to make sure it was done correctly. They said they specialize in small residential investments," Mom continued. "Apparently they're planning to continue renting it out, so we'll still have tenants next door, but at least we have the cash now to catch up on everything." "That sounds perfect," I said honestly. "I was worried you'd be upset about strangers owning your old room, but you seem okay with it." "Mom, I'm 29 years old. It hasn't been my room for over a decade. If selling it helps you and Dad feel more secure, then I'm happy about it." "You're such a good daughter," Mom said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "Some children would be angry about their childhood room being sold." "Have you told anyone else in the family yet?" I asked. "Just your brother. Kevin thinks we should have asked for more money, but honestly we needed the cash so badly that we would have taken less. Kevin was my older brother who lived 2 states away and had strong opinions about things he didn't understand. I wasn't surprised he thought they should have negotiated harder. The important thing is that it solved your immediate problem, I said. It really did. We can pay off the credit cards, catch up on the utilities, and still have money left over for emergencies. I feel like we can breathe again. The relief in her voice made every penny of the $65,000 worth it. When do you want me to come pack up my things? I asked. This weekend would be great. The new owners said they want to do some renovations before the current tenant's lease expires next month. The current tenant was a quiet graduate student named Marcus who paid his rent on time and kept the space immaculate. I'd already decided to offer him a lease renewal with a modest rent increase. I'll be there Saturday morning, I promised. Perfect. And Lily? Thank you for being so understanding about this. I know it's strange to have your childhood room sold to strangers, but you've handled it so maturely. If only she knew how strange it really was. Saturday morning, I drove to my parents' house with empty boxes and a renewed appreciation for the irony of my situation. I was about to pack up my childhood belongings from a room I now technically owned, while my parents thanked me for being understanding about selling it to strangers. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. A modest two-story colonial with the wraparound porch my dad had built when I was in middle school. The separate entrance to my old room was around the side, barely visible from the street. Mom met me at the front door with coffee and what appeared to be genuine excitement about their financial turnaround. The new owners seem really nice, she said as we walked upstairs to my old room. Well, I haven't met them personally, but their property manager came by yesterday to do a walkthrough. Very professional young woman. The property manager would be Jessica Chin, one of my employees who handled the smaller residential properties in my portfolio. I'd briefed her about the situation and asked her to handle any direct interactions with my parents. What did she say about the renovations? I asked. Nothing major. Some paint, maybe update the bathroom fixtures, possibly install better lighting. All improvements really. I think they want to increase the rental value. They did. I'd already planned several upgrades that would allow me to raise the rent from $800 to about $1,000 per month, which was still below market rate for the area but would provide a steady return on my investment. We reached my old room and I felt a familiar wave of nostalgia. The space had been my sanctuary throughout high school. Pale blue walls covered with posters of bands I'd thought were incredibly cool, a desk by the window where I'd done homework and dreamed about my future, bookshelves filled with novels I'd read multiple times. Most of that was gone now, of course. When my parents had converted it to a rental, they'd painted over my carefully chosen wall colors, removed my built-in furniture and created a generic apartment space. But there were still traces of my childhood everywhere. Scuff marks on the hardwood floor from moving furniture. A small hole in the wall behind where my dresser used to be, the window seat I'd begged Dad to build for my 13th birthday. I kept some things in boxes in the closet, Mom said, opening the door to reveal several containers I'd left behind when I moved out for college. I wasn't sure what you'd want to keep and what you'd want to donate. I started going through the boxes, finding a mixture of books, photos, school papers, and random objects that had seemed important to teenage me. Some of it was worth keeping. Photo albums, a few books I'd loved, some jewelry from high school. Most of it could be donated. Mom, I said as I sorted through a box of old school projects. Can I ask you something about the sale? Of course, sweetheart. How did you find this buyer? It seems like a pretty unusual arrangement. Mom sat down on the window seat. That's the strange part. We hadn't even officially put it on the market yet. We talked to a realtor about the possibility, and she said it might be difficult to find someone willing to buy just part of a house. I nodded. That was true. It wasn't a conventional purchase. But then she called us about a week later and said she had a client who specialized in unusual residential investments. Someone who was specifically looking for small rental properties in good neighborhoods. The realtor was Sarah Martinez, whom I'd worked with on several property purchases over the past 2 years. I'd asked her to approach my parents with the offer from her client, rather than approaching them directly. Did you meet with them in person? I asked. Just once with their attorney. Very professional meeting at the lawyer's office downtown. They had all the paperwork ready, a certified check for the full amount, and they were willing to close within 2 weeks. That must have seemed too good to be true. It did. Mom laughed. Your father kept waiting for them to change their minds or try to negotiate the price down. But they never did. They seemed genuinely interested in the property as an investment. Because I was genuinely interested in helping my parents and making a sound investment at the same time. The only unusual thing, Mom continued, was that they specifically asked to keep the current tenant. Most investors want to choose their own renters, but they said they'd reviewed his rental history and were happy to continue the existing lease. I'd asked for that because Marcus was an ideal tenant, and I didn't want him to be displaced by my purchase. It also helped maintain continuity for my parents, who were used to having him as a neighbor. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Finish the walkthrough of the Rodriguez property. Everything looks good. The tenant seems very responsible and your parents are lovely people. When do you want to start the renovations? I texted back, give me a few weeks to coordinate everything. Make sure any work we do doesn't disturb my parents too much. Everything okay? Mom asked, noticing me texting. Just work stuff, I said, which was technically true. I continued packing while Mom told me about their plans for the money. They were going to pay off their credit card debt, catch up on some deferred home maintenance and put the rest in savings for emergencies. Your father is so relieved, she said. He's been feeling terrible about the financial stress, especially since losing his job. This sale gives us breathing room to figure out what's next. Has he had any promising job interviews? A few, but nothing concrete yet. The job market is tough for someone his age. But now we're not panicking about the mortgage every month, so he can take his time finding the right opportunity. That had been exactly my goal. I wanted my parents to have financial security without the pressure of desperate decisions. As I packed the last box, Mom walked around the room one more time. You know, she said, I'm actually glad these investors bought it instead of some random person who might not take care of it. Why is that? Because they seem to really understand the value of the space. Their property manager mentioned that they want to preserve the character of the room while updating it. They're not planning to change the layout or remove any of the built-in features. That was because I'd specifically instructed Jessica to emphasize our commitment to maintaining the room's character. I wanted to update it without destroying the elements that made it special. Plus, Mom continued, they're local investors, so they'll be responsive if any issues come up. It's not like we sold to some big corporation that doesn't care about the neighborhood. I almost laughed at that. She wasn't wrong. I was definitely a local investor who cared about the neighborhood. We loaded my boxes into my car, and I was getting ready to leave when Dad came home from his Saturday morning coffee with his former co-workers. Lily. He greeted me with a hug. Getting your stuff from the room? All packed up, I confirmed. I hope you're not too upset about us selling it. I know it was your space for a lot of years. Dad, I'm happy you found a solution to your financial concerns. That's much more important than sentimental attachment to a room. He looked relieved. The buyers seem like good people. Professional, straightforward, fair price. Sometimes things just work out. Sometimes they do, I agreed. As I drove home, I reflected on the strange situation I'd created. I now owned my childhood room, my parents had the financial relief they needed, and nobody knew I was responsible for solving their problem. It was exactly the outcome I'd wanted, but it felt surreal to be keeping such a significant secret from people I loved. My phone rang as I was unloading boxes at my apartment. It was Kevin, my brother. Lily. Mom told me about the room sale. Are you okay with strangers owning your old space? I'm fine with it, I said. It solved Mom and Dad's money problems. I still think they could have gotten more for it. $65,000 seems low for that much square footage in that neighborhood. Kevin always had opinions about other people's financial decisions, despite having made several questionable ones himself. It's a studio apartment without a real kitchen, I pointed out. And it required buyers willing to purchase part of a house. $65,000 was actually pretty generous. Maybe. I just hope these investors aren't planning to flip it or do something that will hurt the property values. I think they're planning to hold it as a rental property, I said. Long-term investment. Well, as long as Mom and Dad are happy with the deal, I guess it worked out. It had worked out better than Kevin realized. That evening, I got another text from Mom. Lily, I keep thinking about how mature you were about the room sale. Some children would have been very upset about their childhood space being sold. You handled it so gracefully. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of the secret I was keeping. My parents were grateful for my understanding about a transaction I'd actually orchestrated. They were thanking me for being gracious about something I'd done to help them. I texted back, "I just want you and Dad to be financially secure. That's more important than anything else." "You're such a good daughter," she replied. "We're so lucky to have you." 2 weeks later, Jessica called to update me on the renovation plans for my parents' property. "I've got quotes for painting, bathroom updates and new lighting fixtures," she said. "The total cost will be about $8,000, but it should increase the rental value by at least $200 per month." "That sounds reasonable," I said. "Make sure to coordinate with my parents about timing. I don't want the construction to be disruptive." "Already handled. I spoke with your mother yesterday and she said they're fine with some noise during normal business hours. She's actually excited about the improvements." Of course she was. The renovations would improve the property value of their main house as well. She also mentioned that they're so grateful to have such considerate new neighbors, Jessica continued. She said the investors have been very respectful about the whole process. "That's nice to hear," I said, trying not to laugh. A month later, the renovations were complete, and Marcus had signed a new lease at the higher rent. The property was generating a modest but steady return on my investment, and my parents' financial situation had stabilized significantly. Dad had found a part-time consulting position with his former company, which provided some income and health insurance while he continued looking for full-time work. Mom had mentioned in passing that they were no longer losing sleep over money, which made every dollar I'd spent worth it. The secret arrangement had worked perfectly, except for one small problem. The longer I kept it from my parents, the stranger it felt to accept their gratitude for being understanding about something I'd actually done for them. 3 months after the sale, I finally decided to tell them the truth. I called Mom on a Saturday afternoon when I knew both she and Dad would be home. "Hi, sweetheart," she answered. "How are you?" "I'm good, Mom. Actually, I was wondering if I could come over for dinner tomorrow. There's something I want to talk to you and Dad about." "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound serious." "Everything's fine. I just have something to share with you. Now you've got me curious. Can you give me a hint?" I thought about how to preview this conversation. "It's about the sale of my room, actually." "Oh. Did you find something you forgot to pack?" The new owners have been very accommodating about little things like that. "Something like that," I said. "I'll explain tomorrow." Sunday dinner at my parents' house was one of our family traditions that had survived even the financial stress of the past year. Mom always cooked too much food and Dad always insisted on telling stories about his week that were probably only interesting to him. As we finished dessert, I decided it was time to have the conversation I'd been planning. "Mom, Dad, remember when you sold my room to those investors?" "Of course," Dad said. "Best thing that happened to us all year." "Why?" "Well, I need to tell you something about that sale." They both looked at me with curiosity. "The investors who bought the room, that wasn't actually strangers." Mom looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean the buyer was my property management company. I bought my own room back from you." The silence that followed was complete. Dad stared at me. "You bought your own room?" "Through one of my business entities, yes." "But..." Mom struggled to find words. "You have a property management company." This was the part of the conversation I'd been dreading. In order to explain why I'd bought the room, I'd have to explain that I had the resources to buy the room. "I do. I've been investing in rental properties for the past 5 years. I currently own 12 residential properties across the county." 12 properties? Dad's voice was faint. "Small ones mostly. Duplexes, small apartment buildings, a few single-family homes that I rent out." Mom was staring at me like I'd just announced I was from another planet. "Lily, how is this possible? You work as a bookkeeper." "I work as a property manager," I corrected. "For my own properties and for a few other investors. It's been quite successful." Dad leaned forward. "Successful enough to buy part of our house for $65,000? Successful enough that $65,000 was a reasonable investment that also helped you solve your financial problems." "You bought our room to help us?" Mom asked. "I bought it because it was a good investment and because you needed the money." Both things could be true. The silence stretched on while they processed this information. "Lily," Dad said slowly, "how much money do you make from these properties?" It was a question I'd been hoping to avoid, but I'd committed to honesty. Last year my net income from real estate was about $240,000. Dad made a choking sound. Mom's mouth fell open. 240,000? Mom whispered. It varies year to year depending on market conditions and new acquisitions, but yes, approximately that. Lily, Dad said, that's more money than I made in my best year at the plant. I've been fortunate with my investments, I said diplomatically. Mom was still staring at me. Why didn't you tell us you were successful? Why let us struggle with money when you could have helped? I did help, I pointed out. I bought your room. But secretly. Why secretly? It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself for months. Because I wanted to help without making you feel bad about needing help, I said. And because I wasn't sure you'd accept direct financial assistance from your daughter. Dad considered this. You're probably right about that. I would have had a hard time taking money from my child. But buying the room was different, Mom said slowly. It felt like a business transaction. Because it was a business transaction, I confirmed. I bought an asset that generates rental income. The fact that it also solved your financial problem was a bonus. A bonus you planned, Dad pointed out. A bonus I hoped for, I corrected. We talked for another 2 hours about my real estate business, my investment strategy, and my decision to help them without revealing my involvement. By the end of the conversation I think they understood both my success and my secrecy. Lily, Mom said as I was getting ready to leave, I need to ask you something. Okay. Are you happy? Are you happy with your life and your work? It was such a mom question and exactly what I needed to hear. I'm very happy, I said honestly. I love what I do, I'm good at it, and it allows me to help people I care about. Then I'm proud of you, she said simply. And grateful. Even if you did trick us into accepting your help. I prefer to think of it as creative problem solving, I said. Dad laughed. Well, it worked. We have financial security, you have a good investment, and Marcus has a nice place to live. Everybody wins. Everybody wins, I agreed. 6 months later, Dad found a full-time position with a company that valued his experience, and Mom decided to increase her hours at the library. They were financially stable, emotionally secure, and proud of their daughter's business success. I still owned my childhood room, which continued to generate steady rental income and had appreciated nicely in value. Marcus was a model tenant who treated the space with respect and paid his rent early every month. And my parents had learned that sometimes the best help comes from the most unexpected sources, even when those sources are closer to home than you might imagine. The room where I'd grown up dreaming about my future had become the foundation for helping my parents build theirs. It seemed like exactly the right kind of circle to complete.